Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are. I am pleased and honored to welcome you all to the virtual event entitled Delivering Critical Assistance for Palestine Refugees, Challenges and Opportunities in a Complex Context. This event is organized by the United Nations Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People. I am Sheikh Nya, permanent representative of Senegal to the UN here in New York, and chair of the committee. I will be moderating today's virtual event. From the outset, let me inform you that this meeting has live captions available. For the participants in Webex, you will see in the lower right corner the option with the phrase multimedia viewer, which you can click. For the viewers via UNTV, you can choose from two channels with captions or without captions and without captions. Our committee is implementing this feature to enhance the accessibility of our events. Dear colleagues, dear friends, in these unprecedented times when Israel, the occupying power, continues its actions of de facto annexation of more areas in the occupied Palestinian territory, amidst a situation exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, our committee has shifted its advocacy work into the virtual sphere. Since the onset of the pandemic in winter 2020, we have been holding events with Palestinian and Israeli experts, politicians, activists, and civil society representatives to continue informing about the situation on the ground and rallying support and solidarity for the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, including the right to self-determination and independence. Today, we are convening for a virtual event on the current situation of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, and the Palestine refugees it supports. With this event, our committee aims to strengthen international support for the rights of Palestinian refugees and mobilize political and financial support to UNRWA. For this discussion, it is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Philippe Lazzarini, Commissioner General of UNRWA, and Mrs. Gwyn Lewis, Director of UNRWA Operations West Bank. Before giving the floor to our panelists, let me say a few words about our committee, followed by remarks from the UN Assistant Secretary General for Middle East, Asia, and the Pacific in the Departments of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs and Peace Operations in the UN Secretariat, His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Khalid Khiari, the Permanent Observer of the State of Palestine to the United Nations in New York, His Excellency Minister Riyad Mansour, and the President of the 75th session of the United Nations General Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Volkan Bozkir. Our committee, the United Nations Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, was established by the UN General Assembly in 1975 to pursue the three main following goals. Firstly, promote a just and peaceful settlement to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and end to the Israeli occupation. Secondly, realizing the two-state solution, Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace within secure and recognized borders. And thirdly, supporting the exercise of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, including self-determination, sovereignty, and right to return. We implement our mandate by raising awareness on the question of Palestine through a range of activities. Among them, events and conferences at the UN headquarters here in New York and abroad, a capacity building program for the state of Palestine, and the annual observance of the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people on the 25th of November each year. Throughout its existence, the committee has provided strong, unwavering support to UNRWA, and with today's event, we are continuing this partnership. As you all know, of the Palestinian people who still do not enjoy the exercise of their inalienable rights to self-determination and a homeland. Some are living in parts of their ancestral land, but many have become refugees during the violent confrontations of the 20th century. They, and now their descendants, are cared for by UNRWA. In the OPT, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza, around 2.2 million Palestinians are refugees, out of a total of around 5 million. In Gaza, almost three-quarters of the population of 1.9 million are refugees. Tasked with its mandate by us, the General Assembly of Member States of the United Nations since December 1949, for the past 71 years, UNRWA has provided protection, relief, and social services, education, health services, and economic assistance to Palestinian refugees. And especially in the most recent period, when the hopes for a peaceful solution to the question of Palestine had been fading, UNRWA's work has been instrumental in keeping the conflict from erupting in renewed hostilities. This essential role has been recognized by all parties to and observers of the conflict. It is therefore clear that UNRWA needs to rely on all necessary means, financial, material, political, to be able to continue delivering on its mandate that we, the United Nations, have tasked the agency with. I am therefore proud to reiterate, on behalf of the United Nations Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, that our committee will continue to do whatever we can to provide those means. And all I can, and I call upon all member states to join in this noble effort. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm now giving the floor to UN Assistant Secretary General for the Middle East, Asia, and the Pacific in the Departments of Political and Peace-Building Affairs and Peace Operations in the UN Secretariat, Mr. Mohammed Khaled Khiari. We are glad to see you, dear friend, here at the event of our committee. You have the floor. ASG, you have the floor. You have to unmute. I think while our friend ASG Khari can get ready to take the floor, I'm now going to give the floor to my dear friend, Minister Riyad Mansour, permanent observer of the state of Palestine to the United Nations in New York, to deliver his remarks. And right after him, I will give the floor back to ASG Khari. My dear friend, Minister Mansour, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for organizing this meeting. And also I want to welcome Commissioner General Lazzarini. It's good to see you again. And also to welcome my good friend, ASG Khalid, for being with us, representing the UN and the Secretary General. I am so delighted to see so many of my friends and to express our gratitude and thanks to the committee, to you, Mr. Chairman, to the Bureau, for the relentless efforts in our contacts and meetings with the different components of the United Nations, pressing for addressing the needs of UNRWA, addressing their financial needs, and this effort with the members of the quartet and members of the Security Council, undertaken by you Mr. Chairman, is extremely appreciated by the Palestinian people and their leadership. And in this connection, I saw my brother Tarek, the ambassador of Tunisia, Ambassador Sima of Jordan, Ambassador Muhammad from Egypt, whom were very active based on instructions from our ministers with the ambassadors of the quartet in New York and the Secretary General himself, and with the permanent members of the Security Council and other members. And one of the key issues that we always pressed for is addressing the needs of UNRWA and the support, the political and the financial support that UNRWA needs, and it should be uh, uh, addressed by all of them, including with the two meetings that we had with our colleague Linda Greenfield, in which we pressed the issue of the need of the new Biden administration to implement the promises that they made during the campaign and in the statements that they made, whether at the level of Mr. Blinken, the Secretary of State, or the representative of the United States in the debate on the 26th January in the Security Council and in the debate on the 26th of March last. And the fact that Mr. Lazzarini, that we did not meet earlier and now we are meeting today might be a good omen, because I just read a report attributed to Reuters in which the Biden administration will announce shortly a package of $150 million assistance to the Palestinian people. All of it, or most of it, is going to go through UNRWA to UNRWA. This would be a very needed, significant amount of money to address the challenges that UNRWA is facing, and perhaps it is a good omen that we are meeting today once they officially announce from the White House the details of this package of the $150 million. And I believe you might share with us some details, you and maybe others, about the possibility of having the ministerial meeting called for by Sweden, Jordan, the Secretary General, and yourself on funding for UNRWA. And perhaps the delay was related to waiting to see when will the United States new administration announce their readiness to resume their portion of the funding of UNRWA, which we welcome, and we are eager to hear the details. And also, I just want to say, UNRWA is an extremely important agency that deals with the needs of the Palestine refugees in all areas of its operation, in the occupied territory and outside. And we will continue to cooperate fully with you and with UNRWA. And while we express our appreciation for the role that the host country plays, and we will continue to work with them so closely, especially our brothers in Jordan for obvious reasons. And we hope that UNRWA now will embark on a new horizon to address the needs of the refugees in more of an effective way, especially after the announcement of the administration, the Biden administration, of resuming the payment to UNRWA, which will be extremely helpful, and the timing is extremely appropriate time to address the needs. I will stop here again, Mr. Chairman, by welcoming, the Commissioner General and thanking all of you for your continuous efforts to help UNRWA, and we will be ready to engage with UNRWA and the organizers of the ministerial meeting, hopefully soon, to concentrate on the political and financial support. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank Minister Mansour for his remarks, and I really welcome the good news he shared with us about the decision of the Biden administration to contribute for $150 million to the Palestinian people, and that those funds should go mainly through UNRWA. That's really good news, and we really applaud that development. And on behalf of the committee, Minister Mansour, I can assure you of our continued support to achieve to the exercise by the Palestinian people of its integral rights. And we really appreciate also the work your mission is doing, yourself you are doing, and all the members of your staff in advancing the cause of the Palestinian people. We are very proud of you. You are for us an inspiration. Now let me revert back to UN, USG Khiari. I don't know whether he is now ready to speak. My dear friend ASG Khiari, if you are ready, you can take the floor.
Yes, again, do you hear me, Sheikh?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good, excellent. Yes, thank you very much. I don't know what happened. Mr. Chair, sorry again for this technical problem. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by thanking the Committee of the Inalienable Rights for the Palestinian People for convening this timely meeting. For more than 70 years, UNRWA has provided crucial assistance to Palestinian refugees and has contributed concretely towards the Sustainable Development Goals. We share a collective responsibility to the Palestinians until we achieve a just and viable political solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This gathering is an opportunity to hear from UNRWA, to better understand the challenges and express our solidarity with the agency. Collective ownership of UNRWA and responsibility for its funding are essential for its sustainability and the contribution to stability in the region. Excellencies, UNRWA at its core is about people, individual lives, and the well-being of the Palestinian people who continue to live under occupation and are often forgotten and deprived of their most fundamental rights. Established as UN agency by the General Assembly in 1949, it plays an essential role as the leading provider of direct and often life-saving assistance to many of 5.7 million Palestinian refugees in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. UNRWA is one of the few sources of hope to millions of Palestine refugees whose despair and frustrations are soaring. Enabling it to continue being lifeline in a high volatile region is also key to regional stability. UNRWA narrowly avoided a financial collapse at the end of 2020 at a time of acute needs aggravated by COVID-19 pandemic in the Palestine refugee community. This year, UNRWA faces a financial shortfall of more than 200 million US dollar for its core program budget. The agency is facing a serious cash flow crisis, putting at risk the education of 500,000 Palestine refugee boys and girls and health services for patients across the region. After years of austerity measures, reforms, and investment in efficiency and accountability, the agency has reached its limits. It must receive predictable and additional funds if it is to sustain all its essential services and support national plans to contain the pandemic, including vaccination rollout. Excellencies, there is no doubt that failure to achieve a just and lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians remains the root causes of Palestinian refugees' plight. Unfortunately, we continue to observe with a deep sense of concern the illegal occupation of Palestinian territory and the denial of Palestinian inalienable rights, which now enter their 54th year without a solution, as negative trends on the ground undermine the prospects of a two-state solution. Within that context, I would specifically note the expansion of settlement activity continues, while demolitions and seizure of Palestinian-owned structures by Israeli authorities across the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, have reached an alarmingly high rate. Meanwhile, the COVID-19 pandemic has contributed to increased socioeconomic fragility and overall reduced donor support intensifies Palestinian refugees' plight. The United Nations remains committed to supporting Israelis and Palestinians to resolve the conflicts. The Secretary General continues to urge the Israeli and Palestinian leaderships to commit to meaningful dialogue with the international community's support and ensure the safeguarding of the rights of Palestinian people as advocated by the committee. The goal is achieving the vision of two states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security within secure and recognized borders based on the pre-1967 borders, with Jerusalem as the capital of both states. In this regard, we should continue to encourage all supporters of the two-state solution to help the parties to find a mutually agreeable framework to re-engage towards a negotiated peaceful settlement. Excellencies, UNRWA's financial situation is concerning. There would be dire regional security consequences if the agency were to stop operations. Financial support, entirely by voluntary contributions, has been outpaced by the growth in needs, leaving the agency to operate annually with significant shortfalls. The UNRWA Commissioner General will elaborate on that later on. He warned that donor fatigue is not an option for the international community on Palestine refugees question. Looking ahead, we must continue invest in UNRWA and ensure sustainable, predictable, and sufficient funding. This means addressing the chronic funding shortfalls and persistent cash flow crisis through commitments not only for 1 year, but for years to come. We commend efforts by Jordan and Swedish in collaboration with UNRWA to convene an international conference later this year to strengthen the international community's commitment to the agency. To contribute to its successful outcome, it is essential that we strive to ensure, notwithstanding the global economic downturn, adequate, predictable, innovative, and sustained financial resources for UNRWA through multi-year and predictable funding. In other words, the overwhelming political support for the Palestinians' cause from the UN General Assembly must be matched with sufficient and predictable resources for UNRWA to implement its mandate. Excellencies, in conclusion, as the international community embarks on renewed efforts to support the restarting of meaningful negotiations on the Israel-Palestinian conflict, investing in UNRWA contributes to generating peace dividends on the question of Palestine. Your support contributes to the resilience and future of Palestine refugees throughout the Middle East region and will be central to consolidate any agreed lasting peace as well as stability. Together, let us reaffirm our solidarity with Palestine refugees, recognizing their enormous vulnerability, but by committing, as the forthcoming international conference on UNRWA, to translate our political support for its mandate into sufficient, predictable, and sustainable funding. I thank you.
SG Khiari, I thank you very much for your very powerful remarks. They are pertinent, they are very wise, and so they show also determination of your office and of the SG to support this process and support the resolution of the question of Palestine, and also assisting UNRWA dispatch its responsibilities and its mission. On behalf of the committee, I would like to thank you once again, and through you, the Secretary General for Mr. Guterres, for the support given to the committee and the Division for Palestinian Rights of the UN Secretariat. Now, let me now turn to our next speaker. And among today's introductory remarks, we are very honored to have the president of the 75th session of the UN General Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Volkan Bozkir, who will be taking the floor. His participation in this event comes just a few weeks after meeting with the Bureau of the Committee. And during that recent meeting we had with him, we focused, among other things, on the need for continued support for UNRWA. And I was very happy to hear him reaffirm the role of the General Assembly as an entity entrusted with keeping the Palestinian question alive at the United Nations. As Mr. Bozkir is not able to attend in person, he prepared a video message, which we will share with you.
Excellencies, dear colleagues, I would like to thank the Committee on the Exercise of Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian people for organizing this important event. Today is an opportunity for the international community to reaffirm your support for the rights of the Palestine refugees and mobilize political and financial support for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East. I would also like to thank the Commissioner General of UNRWA, Mr. Philippe Lazzarini, and all the agency staff for their tireless efforts and invaluable work, particularly in light of the increasingly difficult conditions arising from the COVID-19 pandemic. For over 7 decades, Palestine refugees have suffered great hardship. They have lost their homes, lands, and means of livelihood. As affirmed by countless General Assembly resolutions, resolving the situation of Palestine refugees is imperative for the achievement of justice and lasting peace in the region. Despite many efforts, tragically, nothing has changed. It is our shared responsibility to support Palestinians and Israelis to resolve the conflict on the basis of relevant UN resolutions, international law, and long-standing international parameters for the Middle East peace process, in order to end the occupation and achieve the vision of two independent sovereign states living side by side in peace and security within recognized borders on the basis of the pre-1967 lines. The international community must fulfill its legal and moral obligations. UNRWA continues to play an essential role to alleviate the plight of the Palestine refugees. Today, UNRWA provides quality education to more than 530,000 students. It provides healthcare that includes more than 8.4 million annual patient visits. It assists in increasing livelihood opportunities, giving clients access to a total of more than 531 million US dollars of loans since 1991. Recently, UNRWA has played a critical role to help to prevent and contain the spread of COVID-19 throughout its areas of operation. But UNRWA's role extends well beyond its humanitarian work. The agency is an important stabilizing factor and serves as a critical conflict prevention mechanism in a turbulent region. Despite UNRWA's crucial and fundamental work, funding gaps continue. I am gravely concerned by UNRWA's critical financial situation, caused by its structural underfunding and by rising needs resulting from the pandemic's detrimental impact on socioeconomic and humanitarian conditions. The financial crisis has severe negative consequences for the continued delivery of UNRWA's core programs. Yet today, UNRWA's cash flow levels are at the lowest in almost 10 years. This is despite the pandemic and the regional political developments that have deepened the insecurity of Palestine refugees. These conditions can only serve to deepen the despair. and sense of abandonment among Palestine refugees, which risks further destabilization of host countries and the region. To make up critical shortfalls in funding, UNRWA issued an appeal for 1.5 billion US dollars. This funding will support the provision of essential services, emergency appeals, and priority projects for Palestine refugees in 2021. Sufficient, predictable, and sustained funding is needed to ensure stability and security for Palestine refugees. I call on all governments, organizations, and individuals to contribute generously. We must do our utmost to meet the agency's anticipated needs, including those arising from conflicts and instability in the region and the COVID-19 pandemic. We must support the agency's capacity to uphold its mandate and avoid the serious humanitarian and security risks that would result from any interruption or suspension of UNRWA's vital work. The question of Palestine is the longest standing issue on the UN agenda. The question of Palestine refugees is a final status issue to be negotiated between the parties in the context of the Middle East peace process. As President of the General Assembly, I have reiterated on numerous occasions that it is our collective responsibility to support Palestine refugees, pending a resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Millions are counting on us. We need to prove that the UN is capable to deliver when it is needed. It is time for action now.
On behalf of the committee, I would like to thank the President of the GA, His Excellency Mr. Boskir, for this strong message. And we thank him for his continued strong support to the cause of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people and also to our committee. We are looking forward to an enhanced cooperation in the coming weeks and months with him and his office throughout his tenure. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, we will now move to the panel discussion with our esteemed guest speakers from UNRWA. Before we start with the panel, let me remind everyone that this event is being streamed live via UN Web TV, Twitter, and UN YouTube. It is also being recorded and will be available on the committee website, Facebook, and YouTube channels for viewing at your convenience. I would like to give a warm welcome to the audience following us via different platforms. Everyone is encouraged to tweet the committee hashtag Rights for Palestine and the UNRWA hashtag for Palestine Refugees. Following these initial remarks by our speakers, I will open the virtual floor for discussions. We will also be able to take some questions which member states can pose via the chat box function in Webex, and the public can pose questions via the Facebook channel by sending an email to dpr-meeting@un.org or via WhatsApp at +1 646 421 0579. I would now like to give the floor to Mr. Philippe Lazzarini, who almost exactly 1 year ago took up the post of Under Secretary General for the United Nations and Commissioner General of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA. Mr. Lazzarini has over 30 years of professional experience, including in leadership positions with the United Nations, the private sector, and the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC. He has extensive experience in humanitarian assistance and international coordination in conflict and post-conflict areas at senior levels. Prior to his appointment to UNRWA, Mr. Lazzarini served from August 2015, as the Deputy UN Special Coordinator and as the Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator for Lebanon, UNSCOR. Mr. Lazzarini, welcome, and you have the floor. Pleased to see you. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Nyang, and also member of the committee for the invitation and hosting this briefing today. It might be that a different name appear on the screen, but this is also due to the fact that I had on my side some technical problems. So just to tell you that I haven't changed my name in between. And I would like also to thank the member of the committee for keeping continuously stressing the essential role of UNRWA, as you have mentioned during your introductory remark. There is absolutely no doubt that 2020 has been an extremely challenging year for the Palestinian refugees. The global COVID-19 pandemic has hit Palestinian refugees really hard. And the pandemic, the lockdown, and the impoverishment of already vulnerable communities add to decades of conflict, occupation, blockade, displacement, and violation of basic rights. Across the region, I see despair growing in the camp. Unemployment and poverty were already high among the Palestinian refugee community before the pandemic. But in my recent visit to camp in the West Bank, in Gaza, in Jordan, in Lebanon and Syria, I was really alarmed by the level of hardship that Palestinian refugees struggle with. For example, last week I was in Ain el-Helwa camp in southern Lebanon, and a young unemployed Palestinian refugee told me he constantly asked himself whether if he would die from COVID, from hunger, or while trying to cross the Mediterranean on a dinghy. People are struggling on a daily life to make ends meet. People are struggling daily to ensure one meal for their families. No one should be made to feel so desperate. No one should have to choose from this, free, deadly option. There is also, and this was highlighted by the President of the General Assembly, a sense of abandonment spreading among the younger generation within the Palestinian refugee community. Young people feel abandoned because global and regional changes have ignored their right to a dignified life. They also feel abandoned because funding to UNRWA in 2020 went down to the level of 2013 at a time needs have significantly increased. And in this context, Palestinian refugees across the region almost exclusively rely on UNRWA services and request that it does, and they are requesting the agency that we do more at a time our resources are even more limited. And despite the agency reached a breaking point in November 2020, you might remember that for the first time in the history of UNRWA, I had to announce that we did not have sufficient money in our account to pay the full salary of our staff. I stressed my full determination to maintain all the critical services. Just imagine how disastrous it would have been if we would have been forced to suspend our education, health, and humanitarian services. What would that mean for Palestinian refugees' rights? For donors whose investment over decades in the human development would be lost, or even for host country, the region and the international community, as UNRWA services remain, and we heard it also before, a pillar of stability. Now, 2021 will continue to be a challenging year, but there are also signs of optimism and new opportunities. If what Ambassador Mansour, if confirmed today, this would mean that a re-engagement, obviously, of the US with UNRWA, which would restore its role as a decade-long friend and supporter of the agency and the Palestinian refugees. And if this announcement is confirmed, it would be highly timely and would help, obviously, the agency to maintain education and health services for the next coming months, because it was highlighted that we keep running after the cash and the cash flow. And this would allow us to have more time to re-engage with other countries, hoping that they also follow the move of re-engaging with the agency. Another important opportunity I see is that the global pandemic pushed all of us into accelerated digital transformation. And digitalization is not new to UNRWA and our staff. And our staff have shown incredible level of creativity over the last year. UNRWA doctor, for example, at the beginning of the pandemic, switched almost overnight to telemedicine to reach all refugees during COVID-19 related to the lockdown. We have also developed a mobile app to help pregnant women as well as those suffering from diabetes or hypertension to follow their health indicator. And we have even created, and I'm very proud of that, an IT hub in Gaza, which is today servicing the entire UN family. And this has created new job opportunity in a place that sadly holds the world record for unemployment. And later this month, I will also be launching the first online learning platform, allowing students to continue their studies while schools remain closed due to the pandemic or conflict. So modernizing UNRWA comes hand in hand with accelerating its digitalization. For example, in the field of education, going digital means that Palestinian refugees acquire the skills needed to remain competitive in a very rapidly evolving labor market. I believe that we should not miss the trend of digitalization. We owe this to the 500,000 girls and boys in our school. Last week, when I was in Einenelve and met representative of the student parliamentaries, there was a young girl called Maria, and she explained to us how difficult it was to do e-learning or distant learning with a household of 7 daughters, all of them needing a device. And all of a sudden, she burst into tears. And she said, but my dream has always been to be accepted at Oxford. But how do you want me to be accepted at Oxford if I do not have access to a device and do not have access to digital learning? So I believe that ensuring this transformation in our education system will contribute to creating employment and new opportunities for refugees. To confirm that UNRWA, this was mentioned also before, is on a solid modernization path, Jordan and Sweden will host an international conference in support of the agency this year. And the conference will seek to re-engage the international community around UNRWA's blueprints for the year to come. And at the same time, UNRWA will need sufficient, and we heard it, predictable and sustained funding to support the transformation into an agency which is delivering its services in line with our time. An agency that donors and Palestinians are proud of, an agency that understands the challenges of the modern world and responds to them in line with the mandate it received from the UN General Assembly. This conference, and we heard it too, must be much more than a traditional annual pledging conference. The renewed international mobilization for UNRWA that will be born at the conference should help move the agency away from the day-to-day crisis management towards a more sustainable UNRWA until the day there is a lasting and fair peace agreement. It will also finally, if we succeed in this conference, be the opportunity to translate the very strong political support from the member states of the General Assembly into matching financial resources and a better financial burden sharing. So 2021 still comes with challenges. First, UNRWA will continue to face financial difficulties in the months to come, even with the hopefully expected resumption of support by the United States. Our main priority is to keep all UNRWA services to Palestinian refugees in the region running. I presented a zero-growth budget this year and have taken some internal measure to curb expenditure. However, there is not much left to cut after years of efficiencies gains and austerity. Additional funds are necessary to keep services running and embrace the blueprint and the modernization agenda. Second, the pandemic will remain with us for the foreseeable future, as the arrival of vaccines to this part of the world remains a concern, and infection rates are peaking again in some places. With the support of our donor, UNRWA will continue to play an active role in curbing the spread of the disease and support the rollout of national vaccination campaign through its health center and medical personnel. And I am grateful to the host country for including Palestinian refugees and UNRWA staff in the national vaccination plans. The access of all Palestinian refugees to the vaccine is key to the well-being of the entire community they live in. Third, and most importantly, we need to continue to protect the mandate and rights of Palestinian refugees in the face of growing defamatory campaigns against the agency. These nasty and incessant campaigns aim at harming UNRWA's reputation, weakening its mandate, and erasing the Palestinian refugee issue primarily by trying to strip UNRWA from its funding base. This campaign often use misinformation and sensationalism to shock our donors and supporters. They are biased attempt to drag a principal humanitarian agency into a highly politicized sphere where it does not belong. They seek to draw the focus away from the hardship Palestinian refugees face due to their ongoing dispossession and displacement. Most recently, the agency has been under attack for allegedly promoting hate in the education material it produced during the pandemic to uphold children's learning as school in the region closed. UNRWA strongly rejected this allegation. The agency has a zero-tolerance policy for incitement to violence and discrimination. UNRWA is committed to upholding the highest levels of neutrality, human rights, and tolerance. But while there is nothing like zero risk when operating in complex humanitarian setting, it is our responsibility to reduce the risk of violation of UN values to a minimum. And now, before I conclude, I would like to share some thoughts on how member states can help us achieve these priorities. Here, I'm speaking to members of the committee and those participating in the meeting. One, I fully acknowledge the economic challenges faced by all of you, member states, in the wake of COVID-19. But I would like also to call on all member states to continue supporting UNRWA, even as the global economy struggles. It is crucial that key partners maintain predictable and sustainable funding, if possible, on a multi-year basis. I also call on those who have not yet joined the ranks of our donors to do so. UNRWA is a very cost-effective organization. Most of its staff comes from the Palestinian refugee community. We are direct implementer. There is no intermediary. And UNRWA delivers quality services with, as I mentioned, without intermediary. A recent joint report by the World Bank and UNHCR praised the quality and the cost effectiveness of the UNRWA education, something I am very proud of. I also appeal for your support to advocate for Palestinian refugees' plight and UNRWA's achievements and needs in New York, including at the Security Council, for a reinforced global support and diversification of donor funding. I'm also very much aware that next year we will also discuss the renewal of the mandate given to UNRWA. 6, Palestinian refugees are a global responsibility until there is a just and lasting solution to the plight. This is to stress also the temporary nature of the agencies, but as long there is no such a political agreement or horizon, UNRWA will continue to invest in the human development of 5.7 million Palestinian refugees in the region. And we heard it before, this is a time of solidarity in the face of COVID-19 and its devastating impact on people's livelihood. It is important to remember that during a global pandemic, no one will be safe until the most vulnerable one is safe. So in conclusion, keeping all UNRWA services running contribute to a sense of normality and stability in Palestinian refugee community in a highly volatile region, investing in the human development of Palestinian refugees and preventing despair is a sure way to contribute to regional stability. And a healthy UNRWA is a tribute to the decision of the international community to protect and assist Palestinian refugees until there is a just and lasting solution to the plight. So, Mr. Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner General, for addressing in your remarks many issues pertaining to UNRWA. We can see that your remarks are both informative and also forward-looking. So we thank you so very much. And I'm now going to give the floor to our next distinguished speaker, Mrs. Gwyn Lewis. Mrs. Lewis is the director of UNRWA Operations West Bank, and she leads all programmatic and operational components of the agency there. Prior to joining UNRWA, she has worked with international organizations in the humanitarian and development field, in UNICEF, FAO, OCHA, and the ICRC. She has also worked with the United Nations mission in Kosovo and in various NGOs in Afghanistan, Albania, and Tajikistan. Mrs. Lewis, it's a pleasure having you with us. You have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Niang, and thank you to Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, for giving us this opportunity to brief you today. It's really a huge opportunity, and it's very heartwarming to hear all of your words of support and your understanding of the situation that UNRWA faces. So as the Commissioner General has already mentioned, 2020 was an incredibly challenging year for us. And I will speak more specifically about the West Bank and Gaza. Just to take you back, at the beginning of last year, we were facing the threat of annexation, and as a result, there was a breakdown in coordination between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. And so for many months of last year, the Palestinian Authority workers didn't receive their salaries. And so the economic situation was already very challenging last year. And then, as with other parts of the world, we were hit by the coronavirus, by COVID-19. So we have seen a quite dramatic impact on the economy, 40% of households in the West Bank have seen their incomes decline by more than half. Unemployment has increased in the camps in the West Bank. We've seen it increase to 23%. And in Gaza, unemployment has hit 49%, which is really, as you can imagine, very, very dramatic. We're seeing an increase in the number of new applications of poor and vulnerable refugee households to our offices. And in Gaza, the funds are really critically needed for our food operations. So the socioeconomic conditions for many households is very dire. And then in parallel, we're facing the ongoing issues related to the occupation of the Palestinian territory, illegal settlement activities, demolitions, and the ongoing blockade in Gaza, which I'll go more in detail on. In terms of the COVID pandemic, we're facing the third wave of COVID in the West Bank. It is really very dramatic, and since the end of January, 80,000 new positive cases have been announced in the West Bank. The situation in Gaza is also getting worse. They're in their second wave of COVID. And we just had, today alone, there were 2,000 new cases of people testing positive. And this is obviously really a huge concern because of the health system already being quite fragile, and due to protracted conflict in Gaza, but also the limited budgets and some service delivery challenges. In the West Bank, the ICU beds are at 100% capacity already, so it's putting an enormous strain on the health system in the West Bank and in Gaza. At the beginning of February, the Palestinian Authority did launch their vaccination campaign, and I'm very glad to announce that the first vaccines have arrived through Gavi COVAX. So that's approximately 200,000 doses for both West Bank and Gaza. So that rollout is ongoing, but the numbers obviously are very low given the scale of the pandemic. So further support is needed. Israel also kicked off a 2-week campaign in March to vaccinate 100,000 Palestinian workers who have permits to work in Israel. They've also vaccinated some UN colleagues, but we really need more in terms of support to ensure swift and equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines, and statements by the UN Special Rapporteur as well as the Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process have really highlighted the need for that support from Israel. In addition and in parallel, there are many protection challenges that are continuing to be faced, and I'll start with the West Bank maybe to go through some of the broader trends. We have seen, despite COVID-19 in 2020, an increase in Israeli security force operations in the West Bank, which is a trend that continues in 2021. And we have quite a disproportionate number of live ammunition injuries in the camps. 47% of the injuries are caused by live ammunition inside the camps, as compared to 16% outside of refugee camps. So that tension and violence is there. Settler violence has also reached unprecedented heights. 2020 was the highest year on record in terms of settler violence. And that also has impact on the refugee communities. Jalazon and Arub camps in the West Bank are examples of this. But also the Bedouin and herder communities in Area C are particularly impacted, many of whom are refugees. 70% of the population in the Bedouin and herder communities are refugees. So maybe just to give you a very concrete example, in Jalazon camp, we are a few hundred meters away from the Bet El settlement, where there are 400 units of homes built close to the camp. And due to the presence of the settlement and the protection around the settlement, the children in the UNRWA schools are frequently exposed to tear gas, sand bombs, and other forms of weapons. Already 2 occasions this year we've seen disruption of the school day because of the violence. In addition to that, we've seen an increased number of home demolitions, and we're very concerned about demolitions across the board, particularly in Area C. But I just wanted to also highlight the upcoming threat of demolitions of Palestine refugees in East Jerusalem. We have 100 people, half of whom are children, are facing demolitions of their home in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. So the pressure on East Jerusalem by the municipality continues. A lack of infrastructure, poor services, overcrowding is a huge challenge. And we also have a camp in East Jerusalem, Shofat camp, which is cut off from the city by the barrier, by the wall. And in that camp, we're seeing weekly incursions and use of tear gas and high rates of child detention. So the protection concerns are very real. In terms of Gaza, this year was the third year since the Great March of Return. So the situation there in terms of supporting the 35,000 people who were injured continues, and the impact is ongoing, and the health services continue to support many of those people. But I think the thing to maybe highlight, which is most significant, is the need for mental health and psychosocial support for many people. I think the psychosocial and mental health is really the hidden pandemic in the Gaza Strip, and the support to families, to children who have been exposed to high levels of violence, injuries, but also the ongoing blockade of the Gaza Strip. And that combined with now this threat of COVID-19 is really placing people under ever increasing pressure. Despite all of these challenges, I just wanted to highlight some of the achievements, and I think the Commissioner General has already touched on briefly, but things that we're incredibly proud of. We've managed to keep all of our health services open despite the pandemic and some of the challenges we faced on the ground. So our health staff continue to provide consultations through our hotline. We're able to triage health patients that come to our health centres, and we're referring them to the Palestinian Authority health services in the West Bank and in Gaza. Medicines are delivered to the homes of patients in some situations, particularly those with non-communicable diseases such as diabetes or hypertension. And that avoids people who are at risk of contracting COVID-19. The education system has also continued throughout. We were able to quickly shift to remote learning or blended learning modalities, meaning children spent half of their time at home, half of the time in the classroom, which meant that we were able to provide learning in much smaller class sizes. And across the West Bank and Gaza, 320,000 students continued to learn safely and effectively. We're incredibly proud of our education program. We needed to hire additional staff to keep the schools clean and to replace teachers who got sick with COVID-19. And that has been an additional cost and burden on the agency. But despite that, thanks to the solidarity and support from our donors, we've been able to keep our operations running. And maybe finally to mention that UNRWA serves 70% of the population in Gaza and provides food up to 1 million people. And that food assistance is of critical importance to the families. But during COVID lockdown, the Gaza team managed to provide that food assistance door to door, which is something that many agencies are learning from and are in touch with us to see how we were able to do that. We are also addressing the needs of many of the families who are facing increased levels of violence in the home or child protection issues remotely. So all of these efforts have been made despite the relentless attacks and politicization of the agencies. And because of that, this has led us to serious financial challenges that you've already touched on. I would like to re-emphasize that we have exhausted all available measures to reduce the budget without cutting into services. So the call for predictable support is really important. And I would also appeal for that support. We need to continue to provide the quality services. We need to provide them even more so now, given the increased vulnerability and the ongoing pandemic. So finally, just to thank you all for your continuous efforts to support UNRWA. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. First of all, Mrs. Lewis, I would like to say how the committee is grateful and thankful for your stoicism, your dedication, and that of your team, operating in such a difficult situation where UNRWA is deprived of the necessary funds to function ideally. So you've done that, working hard, facing all the constraints, but really dispatching very well the missions which have been entrusted to you and to your team. We thank you for your briefing, which is really pragmatic and very fact-based. And thank you to you, and thank you also to Mr. Lazzarini for your introductory remarks. Now we are going to start the interactive segment of our event. I'm now going to open the floor for comments and questions, first from the member states. And I would like to kindly request member states to focus their interventions on questions to the speakers, or if they want to make comments, they can make comments, and trying to also to do our best to elicit recommendations for our collective action. So, and then after that, I will give the floor to questions we have been receiving through WhatsApp and through other means. So I'm now going to give the floor to my colleague and friend, the PR of Jordan, my sister Sima. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me first start by thanking you and the UN Committee on the exercise of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people for convening this very timely event. I also would like to thank Mr. Philippe Lazzarini, Commissioner General of UNRWA, and Ms. Gwyn Lewis, Director of UNRWA Operations West Bank and Gaza, for their insightful briefings and for their efforts on the ground. His Majesty King Abdullah II has placed UNRWA, as you all know, at the top of Jordan's policy priorities to ensure that the agency is provided with the needed political and financial resources to carry out its duties sustainably in accordance with its UN mandate. Today, the rights and the human development of Palestinian refugees guaranteed under international law are at stake. Today's funding situation is dire and is like no other. Its severity threatens the agency's ability to deliver its mandated services to Palestinian refugees at a time when their suffering is extreme and exasperated by the COVID-19 pandemic and its devastating health and economic consequences. International solidarity and collective support is therefore much needed. Committing to sustainable, predictable, and sufficient funding for UNRWA is urgent and essential. To this end, and as was mentioned earlier, Jordan and Sweden will convene an international conference in the coming months aiming at reaffirming political support to the agency and securing an agreement between member states on the requisite funding levels and associated commitments of predictable and sustainable funding that will enable the agency to implement its mandate fully, efficiently, and effectively. The coming conference represents an opportunity to take stock of UNRWA's adoption of innovative, modernized services and management and programming approaches in recent years, including innovative responses enacted in response of the COVID-19 pandemic and their acceleration program of education and health services, which we heard about by Mr. Lazzarini earlier on this morning. The protection of the rights of the Palestinian refugees and their socio-economic welfare in the Middle East are key contributors to the stability and development of the region. Therefore, it is important that the international community continues to support UNRWA and ensure it continues to operate fully in fulfillment of its UN mandate, pending a durable and just solution to the Palestinian refugees issue in accordance with international law and relevant UN resolutions, including Resolution 194, and within the context of a just and lasting comprehensive solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict on the basis of the two-state solution. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the Permanent Representative of Jordan for the statement, and also use this opportunity to really thank and praise King Abdullah and the Kingdom of Jordan for their support to the question of Palestine, and particularly to UNRWA and to Palestinian refugees. I think we have a track record on this, and you are really to be recognized and praised for that. And we will welcome also the announcement of the conference, international conference, which will be co-chairing or co-organizing with Sweden to really ramp up political support to UNRWA, among other objectives. So thank you very much, Sima. Now I'm going to give the floor to the next person who has asked for the floor, and I'm going to look at my list, and I'm going to relay a question which has been asked by Mr. James Ryan, who is a journalist in The National. And the question is, what is the latest you have on Joe Biden reinstating UNRWA funding that was cut under the Trump administration? Maybe we can, I can give the floor on that, and then I'll go to the next questions. So I give the floor to Mr. Lazzarini and then Mrs. Lewis. Mr. Lazzarini, can you say something about it? I know that you mentioned some of it when you were speaking, but if you can say more, you have the floor for that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm afraid I cannot say much more than what has already been told so far. I've heard over the last few weeks and few months the intention to resume assistance for Palestinian and for Palestinian refugees. Now a decision is about to be communicated, but I do believe that the communication has to come from Washington, D.C. So we heard that it might be today. If confirmed, this re-engagement is a very good news. That means re-engagement with a strong partner who has accompanied the agency since its creation and for decades. And the partnership has also gone beyond just a financial support to the agency. So let's wait for the confirmation, and then obviously this would be an important breakthrough, which would have been expected for some time by both the Palestinian refugees, but also by the agency.
Thank you. Mrs. Lewis, you are in the field. You are living the real situation there, the constraints and the operational aspect of delivery. Do you have any comments on that question posed by our friend?
I don't have much to add. It's just that we're obviously incredibly hopeful, and it will be a huge boost, I think, to us and to all of the programs to have renewed support from the US, and help us with the predictability, both in terms of paying the salaries for our colleagues across all 5 fields, but also to ensure the continued delivery of our core services. So we all have our fingers crossed for good news later.
Thank you very much. Okay, I have 2 other questions, and we have selected among other questions, but I'm going to submit it to you. And the first question I'm going to read has been asked by Ashraf Hijahi from the Golden Consulting. And the question is, how do you respond to concerns over transparency in UNRWA education, making publicly available the actual materials in Arabic for teachers and students in its schools? Any response for that?
Thank you. I'm not 100% sure I understood fully the question, but what I can say is when I started as Commissioner General, I have been really impressed by how much this agency has invested in issues related to neutrality, to UN principle, and also to transparency issues. I think we have to admit that UNRWA is the most scrutinized UN agencies among all the agencies. And over the last few years, my predecessor have already implemented a wealth of initiative to mitigate risk and to mitigate a situation where we would transgress UN value. So as I indicated before, we had a strong investment in mitigating measure, and we will continue to implement the zero tolerance policy within the organization.
Thank you. Mrs. Lewis?
Maybe just to add that an important point is that we use the Palestinian Authority curricula in the West Bank and Gaza. And so that's the basis upon which we teach in all of our schools. And all of those materials, as the Commissioner General has mentioned, are screened. So we look at human rights issues to make sure they're being respected, but also gender and age appropriateness. So this is a very important role that we play to make sure that UN values are being promoted and taught in all of our schools.
Thank you very much.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, this
yes,
issue.
please, Minister. Go ahead.
It has been stated in the past, and we reiterate this at this time, that we do accept a commission from UNESCO to come review all of our educational curriculum for the for the Palestinian side in all of our public schools, and also in collaboration with UNRWA, evaluate their curriculum. And also we would like really to see the same thing happening, to review the curriculum of the Israeli side. Whatever that independent commission by that UN agency that deals with issues related to education and culture and so on and so forth, we commit ourselves to respect and honor such, decisions by such a commission if the Israeli side would accept it. I just wanted to inject that we are also committed to that kind of position if the other side is ready and willing, and not to use it as a propaganda position, but to get to the bottom of this thing and to see if there are things not in line with the UN values and principles. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, my dear friend, Minister Mansour. Now let me come back to a member state who wants to take the floor. I give the floor to Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would like to thank the committee for organizing this meeting, as well as the distinguished speakers for their valuable contribution. We're grateful for the tireless efforts of UNRWA and its frontline workers. They do a critical job in reaching 6 million Palestinian refugees. As pointed out by the Commissioner General, the agency adapted successfully to the new conditions on the ground created by COVID-19, moving critical services to digital platforms. Pandemic is expected to have long-term impacts on Palestinian economy. According to a recent UNCTAD study, the Palestinian economy is projected to grow by only 3.7% annually between now and 2015. Coupled with high unemployment, this is a worrying trend. In light of this forecast, ensuring predictable funding to UNRWA is all the more critical. Turkey will continue our political and financial support to UNRWA. In fact, we already transferred our annual contribution of $10 million. We also continue to send in kind and emergency assistance to Palestinian refugees. As the chair of the working group on financing of UNRWA, we will also continue to secure broader support for the agency to implement its mandate. We look forward to the upcoming visit of General Commissioner Lazzarini to Turkey. I think it will be an important opportunity for stock taking and an exchange of views on our future collective efforts. We welcome the new US administration's plans to restore assistance to the agency. If the announcement is confirmed, this will definitely have a significant positive impact on the agency's financial situation. Since Mr. Chair, you said we should pose questions, I thought I can maybe ask a question to our UNRWA colleagues here today with us. We obviously look forward to the international conference, and maybe to help us with our preparations for the conference, we can hear more about how the modernization efforts and innovation ways of working for UNRWA will be taken up in this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think your question has been well noted. I'm now going to give the floor to our next speaker, to our next the next person on my list. And this is the PR of Tunisia, my brother Tarek Labed. Tarek, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, dear brother Sheikh. Allow me at the outset to express my delegation's deep appreciation to the committee for convening this timely meeting. I would also like to particularly welcome the presence among us today of PGA Boskir, ASG Khalid Khiari, and UNRWA's Commissioner General Lazzarini. Mr. Chair, the unwavering commitment and determination of UNRWA to help Palestine refugees achieve their full potential in human development is highly appreciated and commendable, especially in this critical phase. The agility and ability of UNRWA to adjust the way it operates in response to COVID-19 pandemic is yet praiseworthy. We also appreciate the agency's commitment to strive for the highest standards of effectiveness and transparency. UNRWA remains key for the region's stability, as stressed by a number of speakers. However, Tunisia remains seriously concerned by recurrent large shortfalls, which undermine the agency's efforts to promote human development and meet Palestine refugees' basic needs. We therefore stress the urgency of the collective efforts aiming at providing UNRWA with the necessary funding to fulfill its mandate and ensuring that the agency's funding is sufficient, predictable, and sustained for the duration of its mandate. Before closing, Mr. Chair, I would like to reaffirm Tunisia's unwavering support for the Palestinian refugees, a just cause, and to UNRWA's mandate until a just and lasting solution for Palestine refugees is reached in accordance with all relevant nations, United Nations resolutions. Tunisia remain engaged in supporting any joint efforts aiming at ending occupation and resuming meaningful negotiations on the basis of international law and agreed terms of reference that will lead to the establishment of the Palestinian sovereign independent state on their own territories occupied in 1967 with East Jerusalem as capital. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, my dear friend, Tarek, for your statements, for your comments. And I would like also to see if there is any other members who want to take the floor before I go to the last question, which we have selected from the wider audience. If someone from the members who want to take the floor, you can just unmute and take the floor.
My brother Sheikh, can I take the floor for a minute?
Please.
Yes. Ambassador, Sri Lanka has fully supported the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. I must say, having listened to all what was said this morning, the work of UNRWA is commendable. I must congratulate Commissioner General Lazzarini and Gwyn Lewis for the Herculean task carried out in such trying circumstances. We also have welcomed the United States administration, the idea to restore aid to UNRWA. We are grateful for UNRWA for the sustenance of the refugees, the sustenance of medical and educational support. Sri Lanka has always supported the Palestinian people, and we sincerely hope that a two-state solution will be achieved as a one of agency. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, my brother Mohan. I'm now going to give the floor to my brother Mohammed Idris, the PR of Egypt. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to apologize because His Excellency Ambassador Mohammed Idris had to join another commitment. So he was present with us, but he had to leave. I'm very sorry. On behalf of His Excellency Ambassador Mohammed Idris, Egypt is highly appreciating the efforts of UNRWA to assist the Palestinian people until a just and comprehensive solution to the Palestinian question is achieved, according to international law and UN resolutions and through the independence of the Palestinian people, Palestinian state on pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. We call on the international community to support UNRWA to fulfill its mandate, taking into consideration the dire situation in the occupied Palestinian territories due to the restrictions imposed by Israel during COVID-19. It's important now than ever for the international community to ensure that such violations by Israel are seized immediately and take the necessary steps towards the revival of the international quartet and resuming negotiations between both sides. And if I may ask a question, I would like if we can have from our distinguished panelists, if we can hear more about the preparations for the international conference to support UNRWA. In terms of any, maybe any tentative dates or any preparations in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my dear colleague from Egypt, and I thank you for your comments, and also your question has been well noted. Also, we thank very dearly the colleagues who have spoken from Sri Lanka, Tunisia, Turkey, Jordan. Right now, I'm going to maybe ask the panelists to respond to the two questions which have been asked by Turkey and Egypt. I don't think that there is any other member state wanting to take the floor. If this is the case, I'm going to give the floor to Mr. Lazzarini and Mrs. Lewis to respond to the two questions posed by our two colleagues. Mr. Lazzarini, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. In fact, the two questions are related to the international conference to come. I think when it comes to the objective, we want to go beyond a classical pledging conference. We believe that the two main priority of the organization is on one hand to address the constant chronicle financial crisis which has sometimes become an existential threat for the organization. But beside that also, we want to propose a blueprint about how do we see the agency delivering its services in line with its time in 2022 and beyond. And for that, this conference after that will aim at promoting a re-ownership and endorsement and support of the member states, saying that's exactly what we expect UNRWA to deliver when we talk about investing in the right and human development of the Palestinian refugee in the region. And because of this endorsement, to promote at the same time more commitment, financial burden sharing between member states, and hence multi-year commitment, which would, on the other hand, provide more visibility to an agency which unfortunately over the last few years has gone from one financial crisis to another financial crisis, which is highly unsettling for Palestinian refugees, for the staff, for the host countries, but also for the donors. So that's one of the objectives. Now, we are developing our strategy in every program. The agency is involved. I hope that in the coming weeks, maximum 6 weeks, we will be able to provide a vision on what do we mean by implementing a digital transformation in the education sector. For example, what are the new opportunity arising when it comes to promote youth employment between our technical vocational training center and the new emerging need of the economy. But we will also be looking at a sector like health, and as indicated before, we also believe that through this technology, we can also improve the impact of our services. So basically, that's what will be presented. Now, as UNRWA, we have already provided a few concept notes for the co-chair of the conference who have in their turn initiated number of consultation. Now, what I can say is there is not yet a date and a venue, and the final decision has not yet been taken whether it will be a virtual conference or an in-person conference. Basically, we are looking at at ensuring that if we go ahead with this conference, we will ensure the success of this conference. Basically, we do not want to replicate traditional previous pledging conferences. So that's our ambition. The dates for the time being, we are still talking about end of June or the first week of July. But it's not impossible that a different period of the year might be decided if we feel we need more time to ensure the success of this conference.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lazzarini. And Mrs. Lewis, do you have comments on that, please?
No, thank you. I think the Commissioner General has covered it. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. The Indonesia has requested the floor. I'm now going to give the floor to Mohammed Koba, Ambassador Mohammed Koba. My friend, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador. Allow me to begin by thanking all of you, Ambassador Niang, Minister Mansour, ASC Chiari, and President Boskir for your remarks. I may also thank all Mr. Lazzarini, Ms. Lewis, and of course, all of UNRWA's staff, wherever you are, for your extraordinary works in providing assistance to the Palestinian refugee, despite the extremely difficult and challenging situation that both of you have just outlined. We totally understand the challenges that UNRWA faces and the pandemic and the expansion of illegal settlement continue to cause immense harm to the Palestinian population, and at the same time amplify the humanitarian crisis faced by the refugees on a daily basis. This is where UNRWA's role, I think, becomes even more crucial. There is nothing much left to say other than to make appeal to international communities, member states, civil societies, philanthropists, humanitarian actors, and other donors to continue all efforts and, most importantly, to step up our support for UNRWA. This is not the time to pull back, but rather to provide more for our brothers and sisters in Palestine. Supporting UNRWA means supporting Palestine. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Ambassador Koba. I think I was muted. Thank you, Ambassador Koba, for your comments. And I take this opportunity to thank Indonesia on behalf of the committee for the unrelenting support you have been given to the question of Palestine, to UNRWA. So I'm going now to go to my last question of this event. And the question is asked again by Ashraf Ijahi. And I think it's good for our panelists to respond to it, either any one of them or both of them. So the question is, how is UNRWA teaching children to break the cycle of regional hate and violence and pursue peace within host state curricula it employs? So this is the last question to this event, and any one of you two can respond, or both of you, if you want, can respond to this question. The floor is open.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think UNRWA is very proud because we have a human rights curriculum also being taught in our schools. As mentioned a few times, we are always looking at the UN value, and we are looking at issues related, as indicated by Gwyn Lewis, to age appropriateness or to gender parity or gender violence in the book. And again, our education system here in the region has been assessed so many times by a number of independent institutes, but also by donors. And we have repeatedly and regularly been awarded for the quality of our education in our schools across the region. Now, maybe Gwyn wants also to add something, since she's also daily, I would say, dealing with this kind of question in East Jerusalem.
Thank you. So maybe just to add, I mean, we have recently been awarded by the British Council awards for several of our schools in the West Bank and Gaza. We've received several peace awards for poetry and artworks by our students. We are constantly receiving acknowledgement, and I think the Commissioner General has also touched on some of the analysis of the work that we have been done by the World Bank and UNHCR as exemplary. So we really strive to do the best, because we believe in UN values and we believe in promoting UN values, but also because we want the best education for Palestine refugee children, because that's what they deserve. And so we're very proud of the education we provide. We educate 500,000 children in a secular education system, with 50% of the children being girls that attend our schools. And so we can always improve, and we always work to improve. But I think, you know, just the acknowledgement we receive is testimony to the fact that our education is I have to say, excellent. And it's one of our strongest programs, and I believe it will continue to be. Thank you.
Commissioner General Lazzarini, Director Lewis, we thank you for your very insightful comments, assessment of the situation, and responses to the questions which have been posed. And also our thanks to the participants for their very pertinent interventions. Now, before I conclude, I just would like to ask if Mr. Lazzarini and Mrs. Lewis have a key message or key messages they want to share for just 1 or 2 minutes for each. Mr. Lazzarini.
Thank you so much. I think a lot has been said today, but one key message, I mean, continue the strong support you have shown, demonstrated, and provided to UNRWA. I think next year we will be talking about the mandate renewal, and I do believe it is important that the member state ensure that the resources match the mandate and the services UNRWA is expected to deliver to the Palestinian refugees. We will have a first occasion, which will be the international conference, and I'm just, calling on all of you to help us to make this conference a real success. Thank you. Because we have to provide hope to millions of Palestinian refugees in this region, and also to demonstrate that they are still on the radar of the international conference and that they are not abandoned because they are conflicting priorities across the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner General. Mrs. Lewis.
Thank you. And again, I just echo the thanks for the words of support. I think the challenges are enormous and the needs on the ground are very real, but I believe the quality of our education, our health and our social services programs are extremely high. And I think we've demonstrated during the COVID response. But I also want to emphasize that the return on investment in human development is also extraordinarily high. So every dollar is very well spent. And it's wonderful to know that there's such levels of solidarity and support for the organization. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Director Lewis. At this point, I don't know whether Minister Mansour want to say something, one key message, very briefly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, to the remarkable work of the committee, and also to Mr. Lazzarini, the Commissioner General, and young lady, you know, that looks after the affairs of UNRWA and the refugees in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. We are very grateful for all of their work. as we have reached a record number of voting years ago to renew the mandate. Promise you, Mr. Lazzarini, that we will work very hard, everyone, especially our brothers in Jordan and everybody else, that we will make sure that the renewal of your mandate be at the highest possible, level among the international community, and we will be working with you very closely and with the organizers of this international conference. So not only to participate at a very high level as we did in Rome, when the conference was organized, our Prime Minister then participated. I will be pushing with our leadership to participate at the highest possible level. But besides that, the issue of participation, we will work with you very closely with all the concerned parties in the preparation for a very successful conference, dealing with all of the details that you mentioned and many more that you did not mention, that we are at the disposal of everyone to ensure the very successful international conference to be convened sometime maybe this coming summer. And we will be mobilizing from our side all of our friends to attend, participate in the success of this conference, because it will be a benchmark before the renewal of the mandate next year. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Minister Mansour. Once again, we are very grateful to Commissioner General Lazzarini and Director Lewis for taking the time to participate in this meeting, sharing important information and sharing their insights and answering very precisely to the questions which have been asked. I reiterate my call on all members and observers of the committee and all the member states at large to continue and enhance our support for UNRWA, for Palestine refugees, within the framework of our larger support to the Palestinian people in their just quest to exercise their inalienable rights and a just and enduring solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Before I conclude, I would like to thank all the members and observers of the committee, the wider UN membership, our partners in the civil society, and the public at large for attending today's meeting or today's event. I would like to reiterate the gratitude of the committee to UNASG Khiari and the President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Boski, for their participation in today's meeting. I would also like to thank the Division for Palestinian Rights of the United Nations Secretariat for organizing this event for our committee. I would like to remind everyone that the recording of this event will be shortly uploaded on the webpage of the committee, www.un.org/UNISPAL, where you will be able to learn more about the question of Palestine, the work of the committee, and the upcoming events and on our YouTube page. I now declare closed the virtual event entitled Delivering Critical Assistance for Palestine Refugees, Challenges and Opportunities in a Complex Context. Thank you. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Chair.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank
Thank you
you.
very